Okay, so in video 2 here, we're going to create our numbers and our little tick marks for our minutes around the outside. So I'm just kind of starting where I left off. And one thing I'm going to do is come in here and select everything so far. And remember, I'm going to hit my Option G or Alt G to group it, or again, come up to Object, Group Objects right here, and I'll name that clock. Okay, and so I haven't saved this, but I'm going to go ahead and save it. File, Save As, and we'll call it ClockRound02. And I'm just going to save mine to my ClockRound2 folder. Okay. So now in here, what I'm going to do, we're going to create these ticks. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my clock or just hide it by clicking that. And we're going to start off with some splines. Now, all of our splines, we had sort of grabbed one earlier, talked about it to show what an extrude was. But all our splines are over here, and there's different options and different things we can do. So let's start off with a circle spline. And we're going to make that, if we look at our options here, we've got sort of the same thing, sort of like when we're making a tube object. But we're going to make this a ring. So we've got two radiuses, or radii. And then I'm going to come in here, and for the minutes, the first one, I'm going to say radius of 95. And an inner radius just 1 centimeter smaller, so 94. So we've got this nice thin line. And then we're going to make this on the XY is fine, but let's give it 180 subdivision so it's nice and clean. All right, and we'll call that one sort of our outer circle or outer ring, if you want to do that. And I'm just going to copy this. So I'm going to go ahead and actually first I'm going to drag it down below here. Then I'm just going to copy by holding down Command or Command C, Command V, or Control C, Control V. We'll call this inner ring. And then I'm just going to select that, and we're going to make those two settings here 90 and 89. Okay, so we've got our two rings kind of right here. I'm just going to go to my front view. All right, and we're just going to select one and hit O, and that'll bring everything in. All right, so we've got our outer ring, inner ring. Now we want these little tick marks that we're going to use to, show our subdivisions of our hours. So for that, we're going to use a rectangle spline, which is right here. And by default, it's pretty big. It's 100. So we're going to make this a little guy, and we'll do 1.5. And we're going to make its height 5. All right, so if we select that, and we'll call that tick. I'm going to go ahead and bring that down here as well. And that's, if I zoom in a little, you can see that's a little tick. Now, ideally, what we're going to do is we're going to have that sort of intersect those two sort of bands, those two rings, and then we're going to create 60 of them around the outside. And then we're going to sort of make all of this become one spline object. And then we're going to extrude it out just a little bit like we did the hand. So we're going to use a couple different things here that we haven't used before. The first one we're going to do is use a cloner. So if I come in here and down right here, this little guy, that's a cloner. I'm going to select that. I'm going to drag it down here. I'm going to drag that tick into the cloner. Now, if I go back to my four-way view, we can see this now. It's doing something a little crazy, right? So it's cloning these in a little grid. So let's select our cloner. There's lots of options we can do, but in our case, we're going to do radial. All right, now we can see they're doing a circle, but it's not what we need. And another thing I'm going to do before I do this, just because when we talk about parametric objects sort of being created on the fly, it does use more computer processing power. So since I know these are what I want, I'm going to go ahead and select each one and click this Make Editable, so they just become normal spline objects. All right. So now if I go back to this cloner, I didn't make the cloner editable. That's still there. So I've got it radial. The first thing is I want to get these lined up the way I want them. So let's go to XY. Now we can see they're kind of doing that. On the radius, I want those to intersect. So I can start scrubbing this out. And I know 92 should be exactly what we need. So if I zoom in here, we see it's overlapping both sides. And we need, instead of 5, we want 60 of these, right? So now we've got our nice grid. Now, if we tried to extrude this, it wouldn't extrude all of them. What we want to do is do a connect object, which will kind of create these, make these sort of, it's sort of like the Boolean, sort of more like the Pathfinder than the Boolean really is, because we're using vector shapes. So what we want to do is find that. And that is here in our spline mask. So the fourth one down. And what I want to do is bring in, drag that to the bottom, bring in my outer ring, my inner ring. Okay. And that'll do that. And then I also want to bring in this cloner. And then you can see it's all become sort of one clean spline. Now, if you left those as parametric, it might slow your computer down a little bit. So just be careful. Just let it sit. It'll eventually come back around, but that's why I kind of brought those in. All right, so now once we have that, we've got our spline mask, and we can kind of close that. And at this point, this we could call like Tick's ring, maybe. And then we would do an extrude. And so remember, our extrude is the first one down. And let's drag Tick's ring into the extrude. And it'll think for a second. And then we want to click on the extrude and make that only 1, just like we did our hands. Okay. And you can see now we've got our little extrusion. Now, I don't want any caps on this one or anything like that. Now, if I render this, we can see that's all there. So if we bring back our clock and we take our extrude, we'll call this Ticks. Now we can go ahead and move that out, right, wherever you want it to be. So maybe it sits right on there. Do a quick render to check it. All right, we've got that. So you could drag the same black we used here. If I want to copy it over here in the Object Manager, I can just hold down Command or Control and drag it up and throw it on the ticks. And now they'll be black as well. Okay, so we've got our ticks there. Now the hour hand is exactly the same as the minute hand. So I'm not going to do that one. You can do that on your own. But we've got kind of this happening. Now we'll bring in our numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and drag ticks into clock. All right. And if you did get to a point where all of this was, you were kind of like, okay, this is exactly what I want, you could always come down to the cloner. And if you make that editable, we can see it's going to give us all of these individuals. So now they're splines. So that's one thing. Now, another thing you could do is if you select all this as well, say we grab all of these, we can do something called a connect. So if I right click on here, I go up to object, and I come down here to connect objects and delete. And what will happen, it'll make all of those into one spline object. And again, this will make things just run a little cleaner, a little faster. So we don't have all those extra ticks sitting around. It still will render fine. Everything's good, but that's where we're at. Okay. So I've got that clock hidden. Let's go ahead and import or merge. So we'll file, merge our clocknumbers.ai. We can see we just got some Roman numerals. Hit open. That seems fine. All right. Now I'm going to turn off my clock so we can see what happened to these. Now, again, they're very small. So we can go ahead and let's move them forward so we can see them and go to our front view maybe. Turn on our clock. Come down here to our front view and let's go ahead and first clock numbers. It's off, it's over here somewhere. Now on this one, what I had done is in my Illustrator, I had taken the artboard axis and moved it to the center of these numbers. So that's why this one came in with its axis centered up. But it's still off axis, so I can go 0, 0, 0. And now we're centered. And then we could go ahead and just do our scale. I'm just going to click out here and scale these babies up until we get them where we want them. I'm just dragging, dragging, dragging. Maybe we get something like that. That's our clock numbers. And we can see it brought in all of these paths. So the same thing here. With this, I'm going to go ahead and right click and come down to our same thing, connect objects and delete. And now clock numbers is just one spline, which is really nice. So then if we want to do our extrude, now something I haven't shown you yet is when we go to create our extrude, we can do this and drag it. But if you hold down Option or Alt while you have the clock numbers selected and then select your extrude, it'll automatically make it a child. And every one of those little quick tips, they really can save you a lot of time. If you're creating a bunch of extrudes over time, this would really help you out. So we can call this numbers. And let's go back to our three-way view. And of course, that's way too big. So like before, I'm just going to take these numbers and give them a 1. Now, if you wanted them to be a little more chunky, you could do that. So let's see. If we move this forward, maybe let's do a 2 and see how that looks. All right. And now I can look at my side view, drag those in, and just place them. All right. And this is the nice thing about that, having that ambient occlusion on. You get that little, faux shadow there. I think that's a little too chunky, so I'm going to go ahead and take them back down to a 1. All right. So now everything's kind of there. We've got our hand. You could put your little cylinder back in for the little center post. And then those could be maybe a different material. You can make those a metal or something like that. So I think that's kind of that thing there. So our last one, I'll wrap this one up, and then we'll come back in the third tutorial and create our handle and our legs a little differently than we did last time. All right. Thanks for watching.